Richard. My name is John Paris. Thank you again for joining us this morning regarding our interviews for the North Las Vegas Ward 2 primary race. The Asian American group has been in existence for over 20 years. Mike Vaswani, the person to my left, has been the president for the majority of that time. Sitting to my right is Kevin Fung, our executive vice president. We've been doing political interviews for purposes of endorsements for approximately 7 years now. 7 very, very long years. But we do these both for the primary as well as the general election. Just so you know, we do have a compressed time frame, obviously, with the early voting starting 2 weeks from today, and then the primary itself on April 7th, I believe, for North Las Vegas and for most municipalities. We plan on having a makeup day for interviews probably sometime next week on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night, depending on everyone's schedule and how much need there is for a makeup day. Hopefully by next weekend we will be releasing our endorsements. When we release our endorsements, not only do we notify the individuals, but also we will be taking out ad space in various Asian periodicals throughout the valley and basically putting out essentially a slate card of the individuals who we are endorsing. For purposes of primaries, we always endorse 2 people, since obviously the top 2 vote getters would go through. I realize for purposes of municipal races, if one individual gets 50% of the votes, they do automatically win the whole kit and caboodle, but we still do have our policy of endorsing 2 individuals for each race. Other than that, we'd like to start the questioning. Since we are a very chivalrous group, we're going to start with you, Laura.
Why, thank you.
Why have you decided to run for this particular race at this particular time?
It seems like it was the perfect storm for me, actually. I've been a planning commissioner for the past 6 years, for a total of 8 years, so that gives me a unique insight into the community as far as growth, business, and furthering the community goes. I sat and I watched my community basically become in a state of disarray because of the lack of initiative on the part of our elected officials. So when I first was approached to run, my first thought was, I'm not running against an opponent, I'm actually running for my ward. And that was the ultimate question, is that I read a book recently by Magic Johnson, and it said that the reason communities do not thrive is because of the lack of leadership and the lack of a voice, and that's what I plan to be. Thank you.
Magic actually was at one of our fundraising events. Was it 2 years ago? Mike, do you remember? Was it a year ago or 2 years ago when we had Magic come by?
Yes, about
2 years ago?
Yeah.
It never ceases to amaze me how tall someone who's, 6'9" is in person.
Well, I'm 5'2", so anybody's tall for me.
Richard, same question. Why have you decided to run for this race at this time?
It was actually quite interesting because I knew that I wanted to fulfill a role within the community. When I retired about a year and a half ago, my military career was cut short because of an injury, so I was retired. And so I decided to move to North Las Vegas, and as I was trying to figure out my path as to what my role was going to be, the one thing that was inescapable to me was the fact that there was a lot of people with a lot of talent and drive that had a lot of potential that could push the community forward. What was lacking was the lack of leadership and initiative from the city council to be able to ask those residents as far as what direction should we be going as a community and as a city as a whole. And so at that point I decided to run and say, you know what, I know I can create that environment so we can have an open communication and to be able to set up an environment where people who have the most at stake, which is our residents, can be able to be a much more powerful voice in a very difficult period in our recovery, as North Las Vegas and most of the valley is in a recovery period. And so at that point I was like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and put my name in a hat and be that voice.
And just to make it clear, sitting to, Laura, the lady who we heard from first, her name is Laura Perkins. She is a candidate for North Las Vegas Ward 2. And in the middle is Richard, is it Carreon?
Yes.
Carreon. We do have 2 Richards in this race. I realize we introduced ourselves to one another off camera, but for purposes of the video, I never introduced you as individuals. So I want to make that clear to anyone who is watching this. As we indicated before we started, we will be placing this up online. And we'll email you the address probably later on today. Usually Kevin, who's the technological guru in our group, he usually gets them online sometime later that same evening. So, that having been said, we'll go on to our next question, which we'll start with Richard and then go to Laura. Richard, the topic of tax dollars being used for private investment or for private entities has come to the forefront with the soccer stadium issue in the city of Las Vegas. We realize that issue did not directly impact North Las Vegas to the same extent it did the city, but assuming you are elected, what metrics do you plan on focusing on when you try to make a determination if using taxpayer money is an appropriate place or an appropriate investment when private entities are in play at the same time?
Well, when I look at investment and the community as a whole, the first thing I look at is how much is it going to be an impact to the community, both as far as job creation, and then the other thing is if there is a shortfall, how much of that cost is going to be absorbed by the community. That's the first two things I look at, and then looking at the risk versus benefit and cost and benefit. Then I'd make a determination as far as looking at how I'm going to deliver that message to the community. A lot of when we look at like the soccer stadium, for instance, a lot of people were angered just for the plain and simple fact that they weren't approached first before making a decision. And when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, that's a large chunk out of a city's budget that can be used for something else. If there are other priorities, like education is one of them, or public safety, and those priorities have not been completely fulfilled, then that is also something that I would have to look at as far as prioritizing public funds. There are certain priorities that the community has already set for themselves as far as what they want to do with, as far as how they want to move forward. One of those is definitely job creation. And so if it's going to employ the people within my ward, like here's the thing I don't want is certain millions of dollars to be put into something and nobody from my ward is being employed with that money. That would be a showstopper for me. So that would be one of the things.
Okay, Laura, same question.
Can you repeat the question? I know, he stole my thunder, I'm just excited.
For purposes, what areas or what metrics would you use to make a determination if using taxpayer money is an appropriate use when we have private investment? For example, and the example I gave was the soccer stadium, how using that issue, $60 million of public money is earmarked for the stadium, and that's $60 million that's not going to various parks or other development within the city. So how do you look to balance those factors to make a determination if using public funds for a privately owned entity is worthwhile?
I think the first meter of whether it's a good or bad investment is to ask the constituency. Personally, I believe in transparent government, and therefore with transparent government, where the funds are being used would be available to every single citizen who cares to look it up. With that, people can make informed and intelligent decisions based on the long road. For instance, I do believe in tax incentives to bring businesses here, because once you bring the businesses, there's a whole other tax base that's going to come in. So tax incentives, I do believe in. However, they need to be used wisely and precariously, so that they are not taking away from other funding that might be more necessary in my city. For instance, like the Tesla plant, for example, use tax incentives, and in the long run, we can use those same incentives in North Las Vegas to bring businesses to the areas that we have, because in North Las Vegas we have lots of land, and I believe that industry is going to be the way to get us ahead and forward and change the whole face and the climate of the valley. And I think that's it.
Well, assuming, I'll dovetail off that response. Assuming you are elected, what industries do you plan on targeting to try and get some of the unused land in North Las Vegas, or the unemployed individuals who reside either in North Las Vegas or in the Greater Valley as a whole? What industries do you plan on focusing on to try and entice them to come to North Las Vegas and set up shop?
That's a very broad range of question. Once again, well, the one that comes to the top of my mind is there's a corner in North Las Vegas that is Carey and Martin Luther King Boulevard. At that corner, there is approximately 18 acres of land that used to be what was called Carreon, and the residents there took it back to dirt because Carreon was such a blight in that particular area. I see that area being revitalized in businesses that will. First of all, let me start with small businesses, because small business, I believe, is the backbone of America. You might not be able to employ, 2,000 people. However, you can employ 5 or 6 people at a livable wage. You'll be able to employ those people at a livable wage. And so because of that, those people would have more income to invest back into the community, and that causes sort of a spark. So on that particular corner, I have plans to start off with an amphitheater, because there are a lot of outdoor events that we could use right in that area. And in other areas in the city, that outdoor venue has worked fairly well. So I think that answers the question.
Okay. Richard, what industries would you be trying to focus or target your efforts for purposes of investment in North Las Vegas?
Well, first, when I think of what kind of industry, I look at what the community is. We have a lot of middle-class families that at one point or another had a career that are very trainable, but because of economic situations that are not under their control, they were laid off in some way, shape, or form. So for a lot of people, going back to school, depending on where they're at in life, isn't a viable option. But just because they're not able to go back to school doesn't mean that they're untrainable, which means that there are things, i.e. in the industrial field, whether it be manufacturing TVs or working in a plant or whatever the case may be, that offers a trade. So I would attract businesses that were willing to train hard-working people that may not have any experience in the field, but are willing to give the residents an opportunity to be able to prove themselves and make a career without having to start back from square one.
Sorry, I will ask my next question as soon as I'm done taking my notes. I cannot write and talk at the same time because I end up writing exactly what words are coming out of my mouth. So it's a skill I've never been able to learn. And then this question will go to Richard and go back to Laura as well. Both of you, based on your websites and what I perceive of your campaign strategies from what I've read and information I've tracked down about each of you, seem to be running a more grassroots style campaign. Obviously, that includes knocking on doors and speaking with constituents at not only their homes but also at events and things of that nature. And Richard, regarding your contact with your potential constituents or your fellow Ward 2 individuals, what are the greatest concerns that you're hearing on a regular basis, and what do you plan on doing to address those particular concerns?
That's a loaded question. Okay, so depending on who you talk to, the things vary. The concerns vary. But the one that's been most consistent to me is the deficit that the city is having with its budget. Because we as government officials, regardless at what level, have to be good stewards to those taxpayer dollars. What is it that the residents need to be able to hold the government responsible for those taxpayer dollars? The city budget's huge as far as what we're paying for and the services that are being provided. So how do we break that down in the terms that we can understand, so that way the constituents will be able to have a better understanding, to be able to advocate themselves through me better. Everybody, regardless of who they are, pays for rent, mortgage, utilities, pays for services, and pays for products. So that would be my starting point, the 3 key starting points. How much is the city paying for its real estate and its upkeep would be one. The second thing would be to identify non-union workers within the city that make above $250,000 a year. The reason why I set that number was because of it's a little bit above average of what the average salary is for the people in my residence. But I figure it's a good number to start and be able to justify those salaries to the constituents and be able to say, is this really fair for what the services that are being provided? The third and most important thing, at least for me, coming out of the military, is how much is the city really paying for its products that they're using, whether it be from paper clips at the office or cement for the sidewalks that they're laying down, and compare that with the private sector, and then identify that gap and see why that gap exists. So when you bring that kind of information to the constituents, then they're able to ask the better questions and be able to hold the city accountable for the money that the city is actually spending, and then focus and reroute those funds to much needed more services like public safety.
Okay. And Laura, in talking with your constituents, what's their, in general, what's the biggest concern of theirs? What has it been, and how do you plan to address it if you are elected?
My ward is kind of unique because it has a section that is the urban heart, and then it has a newer section. What I found is that before there was very despairing wants. One community wanted daycares in their area, because it's a 30 and a half is our average age in our ward. So there was young families that needed daycare. On the other side, they wanted higher like a cheesecake factory, like a sit-down, family-orientated restaurant on the other side. So in order to reconcile those, it was kind of difficult. But what happened when the economy fell is that everybody came together, and now the clamor is for jobs, not just minimum wage jobs, but sustainable jobs that you can actually a living wage. And so that's like been the uniting force across the board that I've seen is jobs. The constituency wants jobs that they can go to and support their families on and remain hardworking Americans. And
assuming you're elected, what do you plan on doing to try and cure that particular ill?
I feel my job as a council person is to champion North Las Vegas. For instance, North Las Vegas has 35 parks. You never see about that in the newspaper, but that's why I'm offering, if you have young children, that's really good to have a park that's, relatively close within walking distance of your home to go to and, enjoy the quality of life that park would provide. So I plan to target, just be the champion, because once you tell people what is available in North Las Vegas and the positives that North Las Vegas has to offer, then you will get the businesses. And it's a very underserved community. So we have the average income is actually at or above the median income for Nevada. So it's like my counterpart said, it's hardworking. It's solid middle class, hardworking people. So once you put those people back to work, and the businesses that the community needs, the community knows. So that's what my job also would be, to listen to the community to see what type of businesses they want in their area. Not just because it can be built there doesn't necessarily mean it should be built there. But like I said, I'm pushing for the small businesses. Yes, I love big business because they can hire large groups of people at one time. But in order to sustain the neighborhood, it needs to be grassroots. It needs to be things that the people in the area will support. For instance, if you put, first thing that comes to my mind is like a sit-down, a family-oriented, small sit-down restaurant, a family-owned restaurant. The constituents will support that because that's what they want. But if you put a Carl's Jr. or a Burger King in the neighborhood, they might not support that, so that business is destined to fail. You have to have the buy-in and be able to listen to the people that actually live in that area, because in your neighborhood, you know what you need and you know what you want. And that's my job, is to go out and try to find it and make sure it happens.
Okay. And I have a habit of really bogarting all of the questioning. By the way, Raymond Lamb is the gentleman who showed up a few minutes ago. He's our past executive vice president of the group. I don't want to take over all the questioning. Do any of the other gentlemen here have any specific questions they'd like to ask, either Laura or Richard?
No, this time.
Because I'm happy to keep talking all morning. Okay, well, that works for me too.
Well, actually, I do have.
There you go.
Education. What do you see that problem with our school education? Why are we on the bottom of the barrel in the country? And what can you and what will you do about it? as a city council?
I guess we'll start with Laura and then
Yeah,
Oh,
lady
sure,
of
we'll
the
do the hard one first.
every question's a hard one.
Okay.
Come on now.
Actually, as a city council person, we do not influence the state board. You know, it trickles down.
Yes.
It comes from the state, and then it goes to the county, and then it goes to each individual's. You know, it just keeps trickling down until it finally gets into the classroom. However, I do believe in after-school programs and communicating with other nonprofit organizations or partnering with those organizations that provide before and after-school mentoring, and that provide before and after-school care, so that we can work. The city can be the conduit to unite all those organizations, so they're not disjointed and they're providing a service that is beneficial to each and every student. I think the city's job is to be like the center point, so that all the entities, all the nonprofits, and all the tutoring and the education or the educators can get together, and so that we're not duplicating services, and so that more people are reached.
Okay, thank you.
Richard.
Education for me has always been a community effort, and I would agree that there's very little the city council can do to influence certain things, but that doesn't mean that there's something that still can't be done. So my approach is a three-pronged process. One, identify why the students aren't doing so well, and then to reach out to them and their families to be able to come up with a plan on how they're able to succeed. Along with that, that specific part of the plan is to also reach out to the students who are doing very well. Las Vegas and North Las Vegas has produced some of the greatest and brightest in multiple industries. So we need to reach out to those folks and say, hey, what part of the system actually worked for you? And is there anything we can do either in the classroom or out of the classroom to create an environment for people actually to succeed? The second thing is to actually have the small business involvement, because they're the ones that have the relationship with the community much more so than the larger corporations. You know, there's a couple of barbershops within the ward, one of them being on Alexander and MLK, Classic Cuts. And they have a little small basketball court in there. And when kids don't have anywhere to go, they have the doors open, just kind of hang out and do their homework, or just kind of, you know, have a place to kind of sit down and stay out of trouble. Not to mention the fact that the people that operates those businesses have a relationship with those parents also. So that's another partnership that's already in place that can be expanded upon to create the best learning environment for our kids. The third, and probably one of the more interesting things is what can we do to provide an environment where the things that aren't testable on paper are groomed to a standard where it exceeds the expectations of businesses that are looking to hire. I'm not looking at exactly math or English. Those things are important and they have to be measured. But there's certain things like punctuality, being dedicated, being a team player, that also have to be groomed along with that. So how do we as a community create an environment to do that? There's lots of potential as far as what our kids can do versus having to hang out in the arcade or wherever it would be, to be able to be a productive member and also alleviate some of the things that the city's having issues with. Maybe having a clean and green program in the summer would be something that would be viable and maybe a cost-effective way to keep the parks and the streets clean by having the youth in the communities, say in the high school age, be able to work and be able to keep those areas clean, so that way they take pride in their community, and they'd be also be given a place to actually be able to groom those things that are intangible.
Well, we are right at our time limit for this interview, but again, I appreciate you guys coming down this morning and joining us. Like I had said, we'll probably be releasing our endorsements, I would say, within the next week or so. And again, we wish you the best of luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
Okay.